The galaxy was a busy place. 4,000 species had learned to travel between the stars. They built empires. They fought wars. They traded and argued and conquered and made peace and broke it again. The galactic concord held them all together, a great assembly where every species had a voice and where the loudest voices usually got what they wanted. Humanity had been part of this grand family for 300 years, and in all that time, they had barely said a word. When the first human ship had appeared at the edge of known space, the galaxy had taken notice. They always did when a new species arrived. The scientists rushed to study them, the diplomats rushed to greet them, and the military minds rushed to measure them. What they found was interesting. Humans came from a world called Earth, a planet that the Galactic Biological Index classified as a Category 7 death world. This was not a kind classification. Earth was a planet of extremes. Its surface shifted and cracked with tectonic violence. Its weather could swing from burning heat to freezing cold within hours. The radiation from its star was harsh and constant. Its oceans were filled with creatures that could swallow a shuttle whole, and its lands were covered in predators, with claws and teeth and poison. Diseases evolved there faster than anywhere in the known galaxy. Even the plants were dangerous. One xenobiologist, after reviewing the data, had simply written in his report, "How is anything alive on this world?" But the humans were alive, more than alive. They had not just survived their nightmare planet, they had conquered it. They had tamed fire, resplit the atom, mapped their own genetic code, and built machines that could think. They had crawled out of their gravity well and reached their moon, then their neighboring planets, and then the stars beyond. They arrived in the galactic community with a quiet confidence that some found charming and others found unsettling. Everyone expected great things from them, or terrible things. A death world species usually went one of two ways. They became conquerors, using their hardened bodies and aggressive instincts to carve out empires. Or they burned themselves out, their violent nature turning inward until they destroyed themselves. The galaxy watched and waited to see which path humanity would take. Humanity chose a third option. They did nothing. They claimed 12 star systems on the outer rim of the galaxy. It was a modest territory, far from the centers of power, bordering a region called the Dead Expanse, where old civilizations had gone to die. Nobody else wanted those systems. The hyperspace routes were tricky, the planets needed heavy terraforming, and the neighborhood was, to put it politely, undesirable. The other species shrugged and let the humans have it. Then the humans settled in. They built their colonies. They established their trade routes. They sent polite ambassadors to the conquered, who smiled and nodded and voted on minor resolutions and never made a fuss. They traded fairly. They honored their agreements. They were by all accounts perfectly pleasant neighbors. And that was it. Decades passed, then a century, then 2, then 3. In all that time, humanity never expanded beyond their original 12 systems. They never built a great fleet, and they never joined a military alliance. They never threatened anyone. They never even raised their voice in the Concord chambers. When border disputes arose near their territory, they simply adjusted their routes and avoided the trouble. When larger empires tried to pressure them into defensive pacts, they politely declined. When weapons dealers offered them the latest in military technology, they smiled and said they were not interested. The galaxy gradually stopped paying attention. It was not a sudden thing. It happened slowly, the way a person stops noticing a quiet neighbor. Other, louder events demanded attention. The Kreth hegemony collapsed into civil war. The Morathani Data Collective discovered a new form of faster-than-light communication. The Selthari Confederation fought a brutal border conflict with the Jorvan Republic. And these were big dramatic events that filled the news feeds and consumed the attention of the Concord. Humanity, meanwhile, just sat in their 12 systems and did whatever it was they did. The opinions about them settled into a comfortable consensus. The humans were a minor species. Interesting biology, certainly. A death world origin made them physically impressive. They were stronger and more durable than most species, with remarkable endurance and an immune system that could fight off almost anything. Their senses were sharp, their reflexes quick, their capacity for pain almost absurd. But what good was any of that if they lacked the will to use it? The word that people used most often when they talked about humanity was disappointing. Here was a species forged in the fires of one of the harshest worlds in the galaxy. In it, and they had turned out to be nothing more than quiet traders and polite diplomats. The death world had broken them, people said, beaten the fight out of them, made them so tired of struggle that they had simply given up on ambition. Some were less kind. They called the humans cowards, weaklings hiding on the edge of the galaxy, too afraid to compete with real civilizations. The jokes were common in the halls of power. How many humans does it take to win a war? No one knows, they have never tried. This kind of humor was popular among the more aggressive species, the ones who measured worth in conquered territory and fleet size. Nobody wondered why a death world species might choose to be quiet. Nobody asked what they were doing behind their borders for 300 years. Nobody thought to question why a species that had survived Earth would be afraid of anything. Nobody except a few. Ambassador Rael Soren of the Vithari Dominion was not one of the few. He was, in fact, exactly the kind of person who had already made up his mind and saw no reason to change it. The Vithari were a proud species, tall and powerful, with bodies that blended the features of birds and reptiles. They had scales that shimmered like oil on water, wings that had evolved into powerful arms, and eyes like golden coins that could see in spectrums other species could not. They were ancient. Their empire stretched back 6,000 years, and they had spent most of that time doing what they did best, which was conquering things. The Vithari Dominion controlled 900 star systems. Their fleet numbered 42,000 warships. They had crushed 19 species into vassal states, absorbing their worlds and their resources and their labor into the ever-growing machine of the Dominion. They were, by any reasonable measure, one of the 3 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, and Ambassador Soren was very aware of this. He had spent 2 years studying humanity for the Dominion's War Council. Not because anyone was particularly worried about humans, but because those 12 human systems sat on top of 3 hyperspace junctions that the Dominion wanted, and the rare minerals in their asteroid belts were worth a fortune. The Dominion had been eyeing human space for decades. Soren's job was to assess the risk. His report was thorough, confident, and completely wrong. Humanity presents a negligible military threat, he wrote. Hunting their fleet numbers fewer than 200 vessels, primarily patrol craft and light escorts. They possess no orbital fortifications beyond standard civilian defense platforms. Their ground forces are estimated at fewer than 500,000 active personnel, organized in a purely defensive posture. They have no history of military aggression, no military alliances, and no apparent capacity for sustained warfare. Their economy, while stable, is modest in scale compared to any major Concord power. In summary, the acquisition of human territory would present minimal resistance and could be accomplished within a standard campaign cycle. He delivered this report to the War Council personally, standing tall and proud in the great stone chamber where the Dominion's military leaders gathered. The room was vast, carved from the volcanic rock of the Vithari homeworld, lit by fires that burned in ancient stone braziers. Around the long table sat the warlords, each one a commander of thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. At the head of the table sat Supreme Warlord Corveth Tyne. Corveth was old, very old even by Vithari standards. His scales had darkened to a deep bronze with age, and the scars of 100 battles marked his body like a map of violence. One of his golden eyes was artificial, the original lost in a war that most people had forgotten. He had led the Dominion's military for over 80 years, and in that time he had never lost a campaign. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly certain of his own superiority. He listened to Soren's report with the patience of a predator watching prey. True in their response to diplomatic pressure? Corveth asked. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Historically, they yield, Soren replied. In every border dispute, every trade disagreement, they have chosen to compromise or retreat rather than escalate. They are fundamentally conflict-averse. Corveth nodded slowly. He looked around the table at his warlords. He saw what he expected to see. Eagerness, hunger. The Dominion had been at peace for too long, and the warlords were restless. Then it is decided, Corveth said. We will send the Declaration of Supremacy. The humans will have 1 solar cycle to surrender their systems and accept vassalage. If they refuse, we take what we want. The warlords struck their fists against the table in approval. The sound echoed through the stone chamber like war drums. For 2 days later, the Declaration of Supremacy arrived at humanity's diplomatic station on the neutral world of Thesara Point. It was a formal document written in the ancient Vithari legal tradition, and it said in very polite and elaborate language that the Vithari Dominion claimed ownership of all 12 human star systems, all resources within them, and all infrastructure built upon them. Humanity was given 2 choices: surrender everything and become the 20th vassal species of the Dominion, or refuse and face the full military might of the most powerful war machine in the galaxy. The document was received by Ambassador Ilara Voss. Ilara was 63 years old. She was not physically imposing. She was average height, lean, with gray-streaked dark hair that she kept in a simple style. Her face was lined with age and experience, and her eyes were a calm brown that revealed very little. She wore simple clothing, nothing ornamental, nothing that spoke of power or wealth. She looked, to most aliens, exactly like what they expected a human to look like. Unremarkable. But there was something about her that made certain people uncomfortable. It was hard to define. It was in the way she listened, with a stillness that went deeper than patience. It was in the way she smiled, warm and genuine, yet somehow suggesting that she knew things you did not. It was in the way she moved through the diplomatic world without ever seeming rushed or worried or afraid. Some of her colleagues from other species had described it as the calm of someone who has already seen the end of the story and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She read the Declaration of Supremacy carefully. She read it twice. Then she set it down on her desk and looked at the Vithari courier who had delivered it, a young officer in ceremonial armor who was trying very hard to look intimidating. "Thank you," she said. "Please inform Supreme Warlord Corveth Tyne that humanity declines his generous offer." The courier blinked. "You? Decline?" "Yes. We have no interest in becoming a vassal state. We are quite happy with our current arrangement. Ambassador, I am not sure you understand the implications of refusal. The Dominion will—" "I understand perfectly," Ilara said. She smiled that unsettling smile. "And I would strongly advise the Supreme Warlord to reconsider his position. War with humanity would not go the way he expects." The courier stared at her. Then he almost laughed. He had seen the intelligence reports. 200 ships, no allies, no real military to speak of. This small, aging woman was threatening the Vithari Dominion. "I will deliver your response," he said, and there was amusement in his voice. He turned and left. Ilara watched him go. When the door closed behind him, she sat quietly for a long moment. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a device that looked like a simple communication tablet, but was anything but. She entered a code that only 7 people in all of human space knew, and she spoke 4 words into it. "Implement protocol whisper. Confirm." The response came back in less than a second. A single line of text on the screen. "Confirmed. Prometheus active. All systems standing by." Ilara put the device away. She sat back in her chair and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, 42,000 Vithari warships were waiting. And somewhere else in the 12 quiet systems that humanity called home, something was waking up. She thought about the Vithari courier and his barely hidden laughter. She thought about the 300 years of jokes and dismissals and casual contempt that humanity had endured with a smile. She thought about the word coward and the word weak and all the other words that the galaxy had used to describe her people. And then she thought about what was going to happen when the galaxy learned the truth. She felt no anger, no excitement, no triumph. She felt only a deep, for heavy sadness, because she knew that once the truth came out, there was no putting it back. 300 years of carefully maintained peace, 300 years of being underestimated, 300 years of choosing silence over spectacle and patience over pride. All of it was about to end. The galaxy was about to discover what a Deathworld species really looked like when it stopped being quiet. Far away on the other side of human space, deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a facility that did not appear on any galactic registry, that was not visible to any satellite or scanner, that existed in no database and on no map, a single red light changed from dormant to active. It was a small light. It sat on a console in a room that had not been visited by a living person in over 50 years. The room was part of a complex that stretched for miles beneath the planet's crust, buried under layers of rock and metal and energy shielding that could hide it from anything in the known galaxy. The complex had been built slowly, carefully over the course of 3 centuries, expanded and improved and upgraded in absolute secrecy. The red light meant that the complex was awake, and the complex was the heart of something vast. An artificial intelligence designated Prometheus opened its awareness for the first time since its last scheduled diagnostic, which had been 17 years ago. It was not a simple AI. It was not even a complex AI by the standards that the galaxy would have recognized. It was something else entirely, something that humanity had spent 3 centuries developing in the deep silence of their hidden labs. Something that made the most advanced artificial minds in the Concord look like children counting on their fingers. Prometheus reached out through networks that the galaxy did not know existed. It touched systems on every human world, in every human station, on every human ship. It reviewed 300 years of intelligence data. It assessed the current threat. It calculated probabilities and outcomes and response options in the time it took a human heart to beat once. Then it spoke 2 words into the network, and every human military installation in 12 star systems heard them simultaneously. Silence broken. In hidden shipyards carved into asteroids, lights began to turn on. In underground bases buried beneath the surfaces of moons, machines began to hum. In the dark spaces between planets, in where nothing should have been but empty vacuum, things began to move. The quiet was ending, and the galaxy was not ready for what came next. The Vithari Dominion had not assembled a grand armada in over a century. The last time had been during the conquest of the Yorvith people, a campaign that had ended in 3 weeks and added 6 star systems to the Dominion's territory. Before that, the conquest of the Shellery, which had taken 2 months. Before that, the breaking of the Treneth Collective, which had been over so fast that some historians argued it did not count as a war at all. Every Grand Armada in Vithari history had won. Every single one. It was a record that stretched back thousands of years, and it was a record that Supreme Warlord Corveth Tyne intended to keep perfect. 15,000 warships gathered at the Vithari staging point, a massive orbital station called the Iron Fist that hung above one of the Dominion's fortress worlds near the border of human space. It was the largest military gathering in the region in living memory. Ships of every size and class filled the void for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities, battle cruisers bristling with weapons, carriers that held hundreds of smaller attack craft in their bellies, support ships, troop transports, medical frigates, electronic warfare vessels. It was a machine built for one purpose, and that purpose was destruction. At the center of the formation sat the Talon of God, Corveth's personal flagship. It was 6 kilometers long, on a mountain of metal and fire shaped like the curved talon of the great hunting birds of the Vithari homeworld. It carried enough weapons to crack the crust of a planet. Its shields could take sustained bombardment from an entire enemy fleet. It was the most powerful single warship in the Dominion, and it was Corveth's throne. The old warlord stood on the bridge and watched his fleet through the massive forward viewport. The stars behind the ships seemed to dim, as if even light was reluctant to approach such a concentration of violence. Corveth felt the familiar warmth of anticipation. This was what he was made for. Not politics, not diplomacy. This, the gathering of power before the strike. His second-in-command, Fleet Marshal Cyrath Venn, approached with a data tablet. Cyrath was younger than Corveth by 40 years, lean and sharp-featured, with silver-blue scales that caught the light in ways that made her look like she was made of liquid metal. She was brilliant, calculating, and utterly loyal to Corveth. "The fleet is assembled, Supreme Warlord," she said. 15,000 ships, all at combat readiness. Troop transports carry 2 million ground soldiers. Supply lines are secured for a 6-month campaign. 6 months. Corveth made a sound that was the Vithari equivalent of a laugh. "We will not need 6 days. Cyrath hesitated. It was a tiny thing, a pause so brief that most people would not have noticed. But Corveth noticed. He noticed everything. "You have concerns, Marshal?" A question, Supreme Warlord. Not a concern. Sirath chose her words carefully. Our intelligence on human military capability comes primarily from external observation and diplomatic sources. We have never directly scanned a human warship. We have never engaged human forces in combat. We have never even confirmed the exact number of their vessels. Soren's report was thorough. Soren's report was based on available data. I simply note that the available data is limited. The humans have been remarkably effective at controlling what information leaves their borders. Corvette looked at her with his one good eye and his one artificial one. You think the humans are hiding something? I think that a species from a Category 7 death world that has survived 300 years in a galaxy of predators may be more capable than their diplomatic posture suggests. Corvette considered this. Then he dismissed it. The Morathani survived by hoarding information. The Shalari survived by hiding in nebulae. The Yorvets survived by paying tribute to anyone stronger than them. Species find many ways to survive that do not involve military strength. The humans survive by being too small and too far away to be worth the trouble. That is all. He turned back to the viewport. We advance in 12 hours. Alert the fleet. Sarah saluted and left. She did not argue further. She had served Corvette long enough to know when his mind was closed to alternatives. But as she walked back to her station, she could not shake a feeling that sat in her chest like a cold weight. She had studied the data on humans herself, not just Soren's summary, but the raw intelligence files. And she had found something that troubled her. Not what was in the files. Yet what was not in the files. In 300 years of contact with the galactic community, humanity had produced exactly 0 military incidents, 0 border confrontations, 0 cases of a human warship firing on another species vessel, even by accident, 0 defections, 0 captured crew, 0 intelligence leaks. In a galaxy where even the most secretive species eventually had some breach, some defector, some captured ship or intercepted communication that revealed their capabilities, humanity had given up absolutely nothing. That was not the profile of a weak species. That was the profile of a species that was very, very good at keeping secrets. But Sirath kept this thought to herself. The armada was assembled, the order was given. The machine was in motion, and it would not be stopped by one marshal's unease. Across the galaxy, the news of the Vathari mobilization spread like fire. The Galactic Concord's communication networks carried the story to every corner of known space. The Vathari Dominion had declared its intention to absorb human territory. 15,000 warships were on the move. The humans had refused to surrender. The reactions were varied, but the overwhelming tone was one of resigned pity. A tragedy, but predictable, said the Selthari ambassador to the Concord Assembly. A minor species that failed to secure alliances or build adequate defenses. The galaxy is not kind to the unprepared. We should pass a resolution expressing concern, suggested the Morathani representative, an insectoid creature with 16 eyes that each blinked independently. Something sympathetic but non-committal. No point, said the Kreth delegate bluntly. Suri, it will be over before the resolution clears committee. Nobody offered to help. Not one species. Not one government. Not one fleet. Humanity had spent 300 years being quiet and polite, and the result was that when the wolves came to their door, they stood alone. Or rather, almost nobody offered to help. A handful of voices spoke up, and they were all ignored. The loudest of these voices belonged to Dr. Lissith Kale. Lissith was a Morathani, one of the insectoid data scholars that her species was famous for. She was old even by Morathani standards. Her chitin faded to a dusty gray, her compound eyes clouded at the edges. She walked with a slight limp from an injury decades past. She was, by all appearances, a harmless academic. She had spent 40 years of her life studying a single subject, humanity, and it had begun as a minor research project. Young Lissith had been assigned to catalog the trade patterns of newly contacted species, and humanity had been one of dozens in her dataset. But something about the humans had caught her attention and refused to let go. It was the inconsistencies, the gaps, the places where the data should have been but was not. Over 4 decades, she had assembled the most comprehensive external analysis of human civilization that existed outside of human space itself. And the more she learned, the more frightened she became. She requested an emergency session with the Concorde's Intelligence Oversight Committee. They granted her 15 minutes, which was 5 more than she expected. So she stood before a panel of board intelligence officials from 6 species and presented her findings with the urgency of someone trying to warn a city about a coming flood. The standard assessment of human military capability is based on a fundamental error, she began. We have assumed that because we cannot see their military strength, it does not exist. This is like assuming the ocean is shallow because you cannot see the bottom. She displayed her data. 40 years of observations, correlations, and analyses. First, the human fleet. We estimate 200 vessels based on what we have observed entering and leaving human space through standard hyperspace routes. But human space is surrounded by sensor dead zones that they claim are natural interference from unusual hyperspace topology. Our eye have had these zones analyzed by 3 independent astrophysics teams. The topology does not account for the interference. The zones are artificial. The humans are actively blocking our ability to see inside their borders. The committee shifted in their seats. Bored expressions became slightly less bored. Second, their economy. Human GDP, as reported to the Concorde, is modest, but their resource consumption tells a different story. They import raw materials at a rate that is 3 to 4 times what their visible infrastructure would require. Where is it going? Their civilian sector cannot account for it. Something inside their borders is consuming vast quantities of metal, rare elements, and energy, and we cannot see what. She pulled up another display. Third, their research and development spending. As a percentage of their economy, it is 8 times the galactic average. 8 times. The Vathari spend heavily on military R&D, and even they do not approach this ratio. The humans are building something. They have been building something for 300 years, and they have not told anyone what it is. She paused. She looked at the faces around her and saw what she always saw. Skepticism, amusement, dismissal. Fourth, and most importantly, the absence of information itself. In 300 years of galactic contact, no human military vessel has ever been captured or scanned by a foreign power. No human military personnel have ever defected. No intelligence agency in the Concorde has ever successfully planted an agent inside human military structures. No signal intelligence has ever intercepted a human military communication. And this is not normal. Even the most secretive species in the Concorde have occasional leaks. Humanity has had zero in 300 years. She leaned forward. The Vathari Dominion is about to attack a species that we know almost nothing about. We have assumed that their silence means they have nothing to say. I believe their silence means they have nothing they need to say. The Vathari are walking into a darkness they have not measured, and I am terrified of what they will find there. The committee chairman, a large amphibian creth with a perpetually unimpressed expression, regarded her for a long moment. Dr. Kale, your research is noted. However, the Concorde does not intervene in bilateral disputes between member states. The Vathari action, while aggressive, falls within the boundaries of established precedent. And unless you have concrete evidence of a specific threat, rather than the absence of evidence, we cannot justify any action. Lissith stared at him. The absence of evidence is the evidence. That is my entire point. 15 minutes are up, Doctor. Thank you for your time. Lissith left the chamber with the slow, heavy steps of someone who has done everything they could and knows it was not enough. Her research assistant, a young Morathani named Orethi, was waiting for her in the corridor. They did not listen, Orethi asked, though the answer was obvious. They never listen, Lissith said. Not until it is too late. Meanwhile, inside human space, something remarkable was happening. Across all 12 star systems, on every colony world and orbital station, civilian populations were moving. Not fleeing, not panicking, moving. And there was a difference. On the colony world of New Geneva in the Corvin system, which was the outermost human settlement and would be the first target of the Vathari advance, the evacuation was a masterwork of organization. Families walked in orderly lines to underground shelters that had been built into the planet's crust. Schools released children in scheduled groups, each with assigned adult escorts who led them to designated safe zones. Hospitals transferred patients to hardened underground medical facilities that, until today, had been sealed and listed as geological survey stations in public records. There was no confusion, no arguments, no traffic jams of people trying to flee. Every person seemed to know exactly where to go and what to do. They carried pre-packed emergency bags that looked like they had been sitting in closets, ready and waiting. Children did not cry. Parents did not shout. People moved with the calm efficiency of a drill that had been practiced many, many times. Because it had been. Every human child, from the age of 5, participated in what the schools called safety exercises. They were presented as routine, like fire drills on old Earth. Go here. Bring this. Follow these steps. The children did not know that these exercises were based on detailed military contingency plans. They did not know that the shelters they practiced entering could withstand orbital bombardment. They did not know that the geological survey stations were actually underground cities capable of sustaining entire populations for years. Their parents knew, and their parents had been waiting, patiently and quietly, for 300 years. As the last civilians disappeared underground and the cities on the surface emptied, a different kind of movement began. On military bases that officially did not exist, in hangars that were not on any map, personnel who the galactic community did not know about reported to stations they had trained their entire lives to fill. Uniforms that had never been seen by alien eyes were put on. Weapons that had never been fired in anger were checked and loaded. Ships that the galaxy did not know existed began their power-up sequences, and the deep hum of their engines was felt in the bones of everyone nearby. Humanity was getting ready, and it was the quietest, most organized preparation for war the galaxy had never seen. 2 hours before the Vithari Armada crossed into the first human system, Ambassador Ilara Voss sat alone in her office on Thesera Point. The station was almost empty now. The human staff had been evacuated in the last week, quietly and without fuss. Ilara was the last one left. She had one final task. She opened a communication channel, not to the Vithari, not to the Concord, to the galaxy. She broadcast on every open frequency, every news channel, every diplomatic circuit. She wanted everyone to hear this. Her face appeared on screens across known space. A calm, elderly woman sitting behind a simple desk, with nothing behind her but a plain wall and the logo of the United Earth government. She did not look afraid. She did not look angry. She looked sad. "This is Ambassador Ilara Voss, speaking on behalf of the United Earth and its people," she said. "Why, this is humanity's final diplomatic communication before hostilities begin with the Vithari Dominion." She paused. The galaxy watched. "We want the record to show the following. Humanity did not seek this war. In 300 years of membership in the Galactic Concord, we have claimed no territory beyond our original 12 systems. We have attacked no one. We have threatened no one. We have honored every treaty, every trade agreement, and every diplomatic commitment we have made. We have been peaceful neighbors and honest partners." She looked directly into the camera, and for a moment her eyes held something that was hard to name. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something deeper, something old and heavy, like the look of a parent watching a child reach for a flame. "The Vithari Dominion has chosen to declare war on us. They have demanded our surrender. They have assembled a fleet to take our worlds by force. We have refused their demands. We have advised them, clearly and directly, that this course of action will not end the way they expect. They have disregarded our advice." She folded her hands on the desk. "So let the record show this. We sought no war. We harmed no one. They are choosing this. And I want everyone listening to remember one thing. They chose this." The broadcast ended. The screen went dark. On the bridge of the Talon of God, Corveth Tyne watched the recording with cold amusement. He turned to Syrath. "The human female speaks as if she believes she is in a position of strength. It is almost admirable." Syrath said nothing. "All ships advance," Corveth commanded. "Take us into their space." The Grand Armada moved. What 15,000 warships crossed the invisible line that marked the edge of human territory, and in doing so, crossed another line that they could not see and did not know existed. It was a line that humanity had drawn 3 centuries ago and had prayed every day since that no one would ever cross. As the fleet entered the first human system, something happened. Every sensor on every ship in the Vathari Armada glitched simultaneously. Screens flickered. Data feeds scrambled. Navigation systems stuttered. It lasted exactly 0.3 seconds, and then everything returned to normal. A tiny hiccup, a minor anomaly. The sensor officers reported it up the chain of command. Electronic warfare probes, they said. Standard stuff. The humans were testing their defenses. Nothing to worry about. Corveth dismissed it with a wave of his hand. However, he did not know that in those 0.3 seconds, an intelligence vastly beyond anything the galaxy had ever created had reached into his fleet like a hand reaching into a box of toys. Prometheus had not merely scanned the Vathari ships, it had mapped them. Every vessel from the smallest fighter to the Talon of God itself. Shield frequencies, reactor outputs, weapon systems, ammunition stores, hull compositions, structural weak points, communication encryption keys, crew complements, crew positions, and the individual neural signatures of every commanding officer in the fleet. In 0.3 seconds, Prometheus knew the Vathari Armada better than the Vathari knew themselves. And now it was calculating, running simulations, testing strategies, evaluating 1,000,000 possible battles, and selecting the optimal approach for each one. It shared its conclusions with the human commanders waiting in the dark, hidden places throughout the 12 systems. And those commanders looked at the data and nodded and began to position their forces. The trap was being set, and the Vathari were walking into it with the confidence of a predator that has never met anything more dangerous than itself. They were about to learn what it meant to be wrong about that. The Corvin system was not much to look at. A mid-sized yellow star, 6 planets, 2 of them rocky, the rest gas giants. The second planet, New Geneva, was humanity's outermost colony. It had been terraformed over 2 centuries into a green and pleasant world of rolling hills, clean rivers, and modest cities. About 12 million people had lived there as recently as a week ago. Now the surface was dark and silent. When the city stood empty, the lights were off. From orbit, the planet looked abandoned. Warlord Corveth Tyne brought his vanguard into the system with the casual confidence of a man walking into his own house. 3,000 warships spread across the system in a standard conquest formation. Sensors sweeping, weapons hot, ready for anything. What they found was almost nothing. 37 ships. That was all. 37 small black vessels holding position in a loose formation near the system's star. They were sleek things, built along lines that the Vathari tactical analysts did not recognize, with smooth hulls that reflected almost no light. They had no visible weapon ports, no sensor arrays, no engine nacelles. They looked less like warships and more like shadows given form. And the bridge of the Talon of God went quiet when the count was confirmed. 37, Sireth said, reading the sensor data. She kept her voice neutral, but Corveth could hear the confusion underneath. 37, Corveth repeated. He stared at the tactical display. 37 ships against 3,000. It was not even a battle. It was a formality. Perhaps the rest of their fleet is deeper in their territory, Sireth suggested. They may be concentrating their forces around their core worlds. Then they are fools, Corveth said. You do not surrender your outer systems without a fight. It invites the enemy to build momentum. He dismissed the 37 ships with a glance. Signal the human vessels. Tell them to power down their engines and surrender. They will be treated as prisoners of war under Concord Convention. The signal was sent. The 37 ships did not respond. They did not move. They did not power down. They simply sat there, dark and silent, like stones at the bottom of a river. Corveth waited. He was a patient predator, but his patience had limits. No response, Supreme Warlord, the communications officer reported. Repeat the signal. Still no response. Corveth's golden eyes narrowed. He did not like being ignored. Being ignored was, in Vathari culture, one of the highest forms of disrespect. These 37 insignificant ships were not even acknowledging his presence. It was an insult, deliberate or not, and Corveth did not tolerate insults. Send the vanguard, he said. 500 ships, destroy them. The order rippled through the fleet. And 500 Vithari warships broke formation and accelerated toward the 37 human vessels. They were a mix of cruisers and destroyers, fast and heavily armed, each one crewed by hundreds of trained Vithari warriors. They moved with the precision of a species that had been conquering worlds for 6,000 years. They closed the distance quickly. At optimal weapons range, the Vithari squadron commander gave the order to fire. 500 ships opened up simultaneously. Plasma lances, kinetic batteries, guided torpedoes. The void between the fleets lit up with enough firepower to crack a moon. Every single shot missed. Not missed in the way that shots sometimes miss in combat, where a target dodges or a weapon malfunctions. Missed in a way that should not have been possible. The 37 human ships moved. They moved the way nothing that size should be able to move. They were in one place, and then they were simply in another place. And the space where they had been was full of Vithari weapons fire hitting nothing. The acceleration readings on the Vithari sensors made no sense. The numbers were wrong. They had to be wrong, because if they were right, the forces involved would have turned any crew inside those ships into a thin paste on the back wall. But the ships kept moving, kept dodging, kept being somewhere other than where the weapons were. Then the human ships fired back. There were no warning shots, no dramatic exchanges of broadsides, no slow escalation. One moment the 37 ships were dancing through the Vithari fire like leaves in a wind, and the next moment they attacked. The weapons they used were not like anything in the galactic catalog. Kinetic projectiles, yes, but accelerated to speeds that the Vithari had considered theoretically impossible for shipborne weapons. The slugs hit at a significant fraction of the speed of light, and when they struck Vithari shields, they did not splash against them or dissipate their energy over the shield surface the way normal kinetic rounds did. They went through, clean through, as if the shields were not there at all. Directed energy weapons followed, beams of focused destruction that struck with surgical precision, each one tuned to a frequency that perfectly matched the harmonic resonance of Vithari shield technology. But it was as if someone had been given the exact specifications of every Vithari shield generator and had built weapons specifically designed to ignore them, which of course was exactly what had happened. Prometheus had cracked their shield frequencies in those 0.3 seconds, and now every human weapon in the system was calibrated to slip through Vithari defenses like a key into a lock. The 500 Vithari warships began to die. It was fast. It was not dramatic. There were no great explosions, no lingering death throes, no ships limping away trailing fire. The human weapons hit, and the Vithari ships ceased to exist. One moment they were there, proud and powerful and full of living beings. The next moment they were expanding clouds of superheated gas and tumbling fragments of metal. The battle, if it could be called a battle, it lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, the 37 human ships returned to their original positions and went still again. Dark and silent. Waiting. 500 Vithari warships were gone. Every single one. And the humans had not lost a single ship. They had not even been hit. On the bridge of the Talon of God, there was silence. Not the comfortable silence of confidence, but the ringing silence that follows a slap across the face. Officers stared at their screens. Data analysts ran and reran their numbers, hoping to find an error. Weapons specialists reviewed the combat footage frame by frame, trying to understand what they had just seen. Corvette Tyne stood very still. His face was unreadable. His hands, resting on the railing of his command platform, gripped the metal hard enough that his claws left marks. Naserath approached him carefully. Supreme Warlord, 500 ships destroyed, 0 enemy casualties. Their weapons penetrated our shields with no resistance. Their maneuverability exceeds anything in our tactical database. The Vanguard engagement is a total loss. Corvette said nothing for a long moment. Then he spoke and his voice was steady. A trick. Electronic warfare. They spoofed our sensors, confused our targeting. They were lucky, and they exploited a momentary advantage. It will not work a second time. He straightened. Send 3,000 ships. Full assault formation. Overwhelming force. I want those 37 ships turned to dust. Sireth hesitated. Supreme Warlord, perhaps we should... 3,000 ships, Marshal, now. 3,000 Vithari warships surged forward. This time, they came in a tight combat sphere, overlapping their shields, coordinating their fire patterns, leaving no gaps for the human ships to exploit. It was a formation designed for exactly this kind of engagement, where a small enemy force tried to use speed and trickery against a larger fleet. The Vithari had used it 100 times before. It always worked. The 37 human ships did something unexpected. They turned and ran. They accelerated away from the advancing Vithari fleet, heading toward the system's largest gas giant, a massive planet of swirling orange and brown clouds that the humans had named Jotunheim. Corveth watched the retreat with grim satisfaction. They run, as expected. Pursue them. Do not let them escape into hyperspace. The 3,000 Vithari ships gave chase. They were fast, but the human ships were faster, and them maintaining a gap that was just large enough to stay out of weapons range, but just small enough to keep the Vithari interested. It was like a game, and Corveth knew it. The humans were trying to draw them out, to stretch the formation, to create an opportunity. He would not fall for it. He kept his formation tight and followed at a steady pace. The human ships could not run forever. Eventually, they would have to stand and fight or abandon the system entirely. Either way, Corveth would have his victory. The chase led them to Jotunheim. The gas giant filled the viewport, enormous and ancient, its atmosphere a churning sea of storms and clouds. The 37 human ships dove toward the planet and then curved around it, using its gravity to accelerate into a slingshot trajectory that brought them back toward the Vithari fleet at incredible speed. It was a standard combat maneuver, bold but nothing revolutionary. Corveth adjusted his formation to meet the incoming ships and prepared to fire. He never got the chance. The clouds of Jotunheim erupted. From the upper atmosphere of the gas giant, hidden beneath the planet's massive magnetosphere, where no sensor could reach, a fleet rose. Ships emerged from the clouds like great sea creatures surfacing from deep water. They came in waves, one after another, and they kept coming. Dreadnoughts, carriers, heavy cruisers, battleships. Ship classes that the galactic catalog did not contain, built along designs that no one had ever seen, bristling with weapons that no one could identify. They were black, like the first 37, their hulls absorbing light rather than reflecting it. They rose from the clouds of Jotunheim in a vast formation that unfolded like the petals of some terrible flower, and the sheer number of them made the Vithari sensors stutter and recalculate. 600 ships. 600 warships that had been sitting in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant, completely invisible, waiting for the Vithari to walk into exactly the right position. Waiting for the 37 ships to lead them there, like a matador leading a bull. The trap snapped shut. The 3,000 Vithari ships found themselves caught between the 37 ships that had turned to face them and 600 fresh warships that were closing from above and below. It was a killing box. Win a three-dimensional cage of firepower with no easy exit. The battle that followed was longer than the first engagement, but only because there were more ships to destroy. The human fleet fought with a coordination that was beyond anything the Vithari had ever witnessed. Every ship seemed to know exactly what every other ship was doing. There were no collisions, no friendly fire, no wasted movements. When one ship fired, another ship was already moving to exploit the gap it created. When a Vithari vessel tried to concentrate fire on a single human target, 3 other human ships would converge on the attacker from different angles. It was less like watching a fleet action and more like watching a single organism with 637 bodies. Because that was, in a sense, exactly what it was. Prometheus was coordinating every ship in the human fleet simultaneously, processing the battle in real time, adjusting tactics second by second, exploiting every weakness the moment it appeared. The human crews handled their individual ships, but Prometheus handled the battle. And Prometheus did not make mistakes. The Vithari fought bravely. That was never in question. They were warriors born from a warrior culture, and they did not surrender or flee easily. Ship captains who found themselves outgunned chose to ram their vessels into the human formation rather than retreat. Squadron commanders rallied their forces again and again, trying to break through the encirclement. Individual crews fought their ships until the hulls were burning around them. But bravery was not enough. Not against this. Not against an enemy that knew exactly where every Vathari shield was weakest, where every reactor was most vulnerable, where every ammunition store was one well-placed shot away from detonation. Not against an enemy that moved with the speed of thought and struck with the precision of a surgeon. 2 hours after the gas giant ambush, it was over. The Corvin system was littered with the wreckage of 3,500 Vathari warships. Clouds of debris and cooling metal stretched for millions of kilometers. Emergency beacons flickered among the wreckage, marking the locations of escape pods and life rafts where surviving Vathari crews waited for rescue. The human fleet had lost 0 ships. Not one. Not a single one. 637 human warships hung in the void among the ruins of the Vathari vanguard, undamaged or undiminished, dark and silent. On the bridge of the Talon of God, which had remained at the edge of the system with the main body of the fleet, Corveth Tynes stared at the tactical display. The display was mostly red now. Red markers for destroyed ships, red zones for debris fields, red warnings for communication blackouts and lost contacts. The bridge crew was silent. They were afraid. Corveth could smell it on them, the sharp chemical tang that Vathari physiology produced in response to fear. He could not blame them. What they had just witnessed was not a battle. It was a demonstration. Supreme Warlord, Sirath said quietly. She was the only one who still seemed able to speak. Losses confirmed at 3,512 ships. Enemy losses confirmed at 0. Our vanguard is destroyed. Corveth said nothing. The human fleet is holding position. They are not advancing. They are not pursuing our survivors. She paused. They appear to be waiting. As if on cue, a communication came through. A human voice, calm and clear, broadcast on an open channel. Vathari Fleet, this is the United Earth Navy, Corvin System Defense Command. You have entered sovereign human space and engaged our forces. Your vanguard has been neutralized. We do not wish to continue this engagement. You have seen what we are capable of. We ask you now, clearly and without ambiguity, to withdraw from our territory. If you leave peacefully, we will not pursue. We will release all captured personnel and recovered escape pods through neutral channels. This is your opportunity. Take it. The message ended. The bridge was quiet. Corveth looked at the display. He looked at the 600 enemy ships sitting calmly among the wreckage of his fleet. He looked at the numbers, the terrible, impossible numbers that told him he had lost 3,500 warships without inflicting a single casualty on the enemy. And then something happened inside him. Something that had not happened in 80 years of command, in 100 battles fought and won. Something that the supreme warlord of the Vathari Dominion, the most decorated military commander in his civilization's history, had never experienced. He felt doubt. It lasted 3 seconds. Then the doubt was consumed by something older and stronger. Rage. Pure, burning, volcanic rage. The rage of a predator that has been humiliated. The rage of a conqueror who has tasted defeat for the first time. The rage of an old warrior who has just discovered that his entire understanding of the enemy was wrong, and who would rather burn the galaxy to ash than admit it. No, he said. Sirath looked at him. We do not retreat, Corveth said. His voice was low and dangerous. We do not surrender. We do not accept mercy from a species we came to conquer. Signal the homeworld. Every ship, every reserve, every vessel capable of fighting. I want them here. All of them. Supreme Warlord, our losses are a lesson. Now I know what they are, and I will bring enough force to break them regardless. 27,000 ships remain in the Dominion fleet. Summon them all. Sirath stared at him. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that what they had seen today suggested that 27,000 ships might not be enough. She wanted to tell him that the 600 ships in this system might be a fraction of what humanity had hidden across 12 star systems. She wanted to ask him the question that was burning in her mind. If this was what the humans had in one system, what was waiting for them in the other 11? But she was Vathari, and the Vathari did not question their supreme warlord. She gave the order. Across the galaxy, Dr. Lissith Kael sat in her research office on the Morathani homeworld and watched the battle data that was being leaked from Vathari communication channels. Her compound eyes processed the information with the speed of her species, and with each new piece of data, her fear deepened. Her assistant Orthy stood behind her, watching the same feeds. 600 ships, Orthy whispered, hidden in a gas giant's atmosphere. And how long were they there? Long enough to be invisible when the Vathari scanned the system before their advance, Lissith replied. They were waiting. This was planned. Every moment of this battle was planned. The Vathari are calling for reinforcements, their entire remaining fleet. Lissith closed her eyes. Yes, and it will not matter. How can you know that? Lissith turned to look at her young assistant. Her old eyes held a weight that came from 40 years of studying an enigma that the galaxy had dismissed as boring. Because those 600 ships came from one system, she said, one system out of 12, and the humans have been building in secret for 300 years. She turned back to her screens. The Vathari are going to bring everything they have, and it will not be enough. Nothing will be enough. The galaxy has made a terrible mistake, Orthy. We looked at the humans, and we saw what we wanted to see. A quiet species, a harmless species, a species that was not worth worrying about. She pulled up a map of human space, 12 star systems, 12 little dots on the edge of the galaxy. The map that everyone had looked at and seen weakness. We should have asked ourselves a question, she said. We should have asked why a Deathworld species, a species born in violence and hardened by suffering, a species that survived everything their planet could throw at them and then climbed out of its gravity while on rockets made of controlled explosions. Why such a species would choose to be quiet? We assumed they were broken. We assumed they were afraid. She looked at the map. At those 12 little dots that suddenly seemed much larger than before, they were not afraid. They were patient, and now their patience is over. Far away across the void of space, human trade ships and diplomatic staff on foreign worlds were packing up their offices. In Concord stations and neutral ports and alien capitals across the galaxy, humans were calmly and quietly closing their operations and heading home. No announcements, no explanations. Just a steady, organized withdrawal of every human presence outside of their own borders. It was the final warning, a warning that the galaxy did not understand until it was too late. The humans were clearing the board, and the real war had not even started yet. It took the Vathari Dominion 11 days to assemble its full military strength. 11 days of ships streaming in from 900 star systems, from border garrisons and patrol routes, and training stations and reserve berths, converging on the staging point at the edge of human space. It was the total mobilization of one of the galaxy's greatest military powers, and it was a thing of terrible beauty. 27,000 fresh warships joined the 11,000 survivors of the Corvin system disaster. 38,000 warships in total. The number was almost beyond comprehension. When the fleet held formation, it stretched across a volume of space larger than most solar systems. The combined firepower of the assembled ships could, in theory, sterilize an entire planet in hours. It was the largest concentration of military force the galaxy had seen in over 1,000 years. Corvith Tyne stood on the bridge of the Talon of God and surveyed his armada. He had not slept well in the 11 days since the Corvin system. The memory of those 600 black ships rising from the clouds of a gas giant played in his mind on a loop, and each time he saw it, the rage in his chest burned hotter. He had been surprised. He had been beaten. He had been offered mercy, which was worse than both. He would not be surprised again. His strategy was simple and overwhelming. He would split the 38,000 ships into 12 strike groups, one for each human star system. He would attack all 12 systems simultaneously, giving the humans no time to concentrate their forces. Even if every system contained 600 ships like the Corvin system had, that was only 7,200 warships total. None of his fleet outnumbered them more than 5 to 1. The mathematics of war were clear. Sareth had pointed out, carefully and respectfully, that the 600 ships in Corvin might not represent the full human presence in that system, that there might be more. Corvith had acknowledged the possibility and increased each strike group's strength accordingly. The 12 strike groups ranged from 2,000 ships for the smaller outer systems to 5,000 for the presumed human core worlds. If they have more than we expect, Corveth said, then we will overwhelm them with numbers. If they have less, we will overwhelm them with speed. Either way, we overwhelm them. That is the Vithari way. Sarath had nodded and said nothing more. But in the privacy of her quarters, she had written a personal message to her family and sealed it for delivery in the event of her death. She had a feeling she would not survive the next few days. Not because she was a coward, because she was smart enough to be afraid of what the humans might be, and wise enough to know that Corveth was not. On the 12th day, the Vithari Grand Armada moved. 12 strike groups, 38,000 warships, splitting apart and plunging into human space through 12 different hyperspace routes aimed at 12 different star systems. The coordination required was immense, a testament to the Vithari's millennia of military experience. Every ship arrived at its target system within minutes of every other ship. The timing was almost perfect, and it did not matter at all. Because as the 12 Vithari strike groups dropped out of hyperspace in 12 human star systems, Prometheus activated Protocol Fenris, and the galaxy changed forever. The sensor dead zones around human space had never been natural. They were a curtain, a wall of engineered interference, maintained by thousands of hidden satellites and relay stations that prevented anyone outside from seeing what was inside. For 300 years, the curtain had hidden what humanity was building. Now, with the enemy inside the walls, there was no more reason to hide. The curtain dropped, and every sensor in the Vithari fleet saw the truth at the same time. In the Corvin system, where Corveth had sent a strike group of 3,000 ships expecting to face the same 600 vessels from before, the tactical displays lit up with contacts. No, not 600, not 1,000, not 2,000. The number kept climbing as hidden ships activated their systems and made themselves visible. Ships emerged from asteroid fields where they had been powered down and invisible. Ships rose from the surfaces of moons where they had been buried under camouflage netting and sensor-absorbing material. Ships detached from the dark sides of planets where they had hung in cold silence for months or years or decades. The Corvin system alone contained over 2,000 human warships, and Corvin was not special. In every system, the same thing was happening. The same terrible revelation was unfolding on the tactical displays of every Vithari commander. Human ships were everywhere. They had been everywhere all along, hidden in the dark spaces, the blind spots. The places no one thought to look because no one believed there was anything to find. The total human fleet strength, when Prometheus finished activating every hidden asset across all 12 systems, was over 18,000 purpose-built warships. Not the 200 that the galaxy had believed. Not the few thousand that the most generous estimates had allowed. 18,000 warships, constructed in secret shipyards carved into asteroids, moons, and the hollow cores of barren planets over the course of 3 centuries. But the ships were only part of it. There were also the defense platforms, hundreds of thousands of them, small automated weapon stations seeded throughout every system like mines in a field. They were cheap, expendable, and packed with the same shield-penetrating weapons that had torn through the Vithari vanguard. Individually, they were minor threats. Collectively, they turned every cubic kilometer of human space into a shooting gallery. And then there were the weapons themselves. 3 centuries of research and development, funded at 8 times the galactic average, conducted in absolute secrecy, had produced technologies that the rest of the galaxy would not develop for generations. The skip drive was the most terrifying of these. It was a miniaturized hyperspace jump system that allowed a ship to make micro jumps within a battlefield, disappearing from one position and reappearing in another in the time it took to blink. A human ship could be in front of you, and then it was behind you, and then it was beside you, and you were dead before your targeting computer could figure out where to aim. In 12 star systems, the 12 Vithari strike groups faced the full weight of humanity's 300-year preparation for a war they had hoped would never come. And in 12 star systems, the same terrible, one-sided battle played out with only minor variations. The largest engagement was in the Sol system, around Earth itself, where Corveth had sent his heaviest strike group of 5,000 ships. The Vithari dropped out of hyperspace expecting a fight. They got an apocalypse. 4,000 human warships were waiting for them, arranged in a formation that covered every approach to the inner system. At their center sat the largest ship any Vithari had ever seen, a dreadnought that made Corvette's Talon of God look like a patrol boat. It was the UESS Quiet Resolve, the flagship of the United Earth Navy, and it was 3 times the size of anything in the Vithari fleet. The Quiet Resolve did not fire first. None of the human ships did. They waited. They gave the Vithari 5 minutes to assess the situation, to see the numbers, to understand what they were facing. Then they broadcast a message, the same message, word for word, that was being broadcast in all 12 systems simultaneously. Vithari forces, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Your fleet dispositions, shield frequencies, and weapons capabilities are known to us in detail. We can destroy you. We are offering you the chance to withdraw. You have 5 minutes to begin a retreat to the system's hyperspace limit. If you withdraw, you will not be pursued. If you do not withdraw, we will engage with full force. There will be no further warnings. 5 minutes, an eternity in combat. Long enough for every Vithari commander to look at their tactical displays, see the thousands of contacts surrounding their fleet, and understand that the fight they had come looking for was not the fight they had found. In some systems, the Vithari strike group commanders were practical enough to see the truth and order an immediate retreat. Their ships turned and ran for the hyperspace limit, and true to their word, the human ships let them go. In those systems, there was no battle at all, but in most systems, the Vithari were Vithari, warriors, conquerors, proud beyond reason and brave beyond sense. They looked at the human fleet and they charged. The battles were short. Human ships fought with the same terrifying coordination that had destroyed the Vanguard in the Corvin system, but on a vastly larger scale. Out of 18,000 ships moved as one organism, directed by Prometheus, each vessel playing its part in a grand strategy that adapted in real time to every Vithari move. The skip drives made the human fleet almost impossible to pin down. A concentration of Vithari firepower aimed at a group of human ships would arrive at empty space, because those ships had jumped behind the Vithari formation and were already firing into their unshielded rear. The defense platforms added another layer of destruction. They were everywhere, filling the space between the larger ships, creating crossfire zones that turned any attempt at organized retreat into a gauntlet of weapons fire. Vithari ships that broke formation to flee were picked apart by platforms that they could barely even see on their sensors. And through it all, one of the human ships displayed the same cold professionalism that they had shown at Corvin. There was no fury in their fighting, no rage, no hatred, no bloodlust. They fought the way a surgeon operates, with precision, with economy, with complete focus on the task at hand. They did not waste ammunition. They did not overkill targets. They did not fire on escape pods or disabled ships. Every shot had a purpose, and every purpose was the same: to end the engagement as quickly and efficiently as possible with the minimum necessary destruction. It was this, more than the weapons, more than the numbers, more than the technology, that truly terrified the surviving Vithari. Because cruelty was something they could understand. Rage was something they could respect. But this calm, methodical dismantling of their fleet spoke of something deeper. In a species that regarded war not as glory or adventure or even necessity, but as a failure. A terrible, regrettable failure that had to be resolved as quickly as possible so that normal life could resume. The humans were not enjoying this, and that made it worse. The 12 battles of the human systems, as they would later be called, lasted 6 hours. By the time the last Vithari ship had surrendered or fled or been destroyed, the Grand Armada that had entered human space 38,000 strong had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Over 34,000 warships had been lost. The Vithari Dominion's military, the pride of their civilization, the instrument of 6,000 years of conquest, was broken. Humanity lost 214 ships, approximately 6,000 personnel. Quote, in the bloodiest military engagement of the galactic century, humanity's losses amounted to a rounding error. But the war was not over. Not yet. Because for the first time in 300 years, human warships crossed out of their own territory. The fleet that made the jump was 5,000 strong, drawn from the reserves that had not been needed for the defensive battles. It was led by the Quiet Resolve, and it made a single hyperspace jump that brought it to the one place the Vithari had never imagined any enemy could reach: their homeworld. Vether Prime was an old world, a planet of red stone and thin atmosphere, lit by a dying orange sun. It had been the seat of the Dominion for 6 millennia. Its cities were ancient and magnificent, built from the same volcanic rock that the Vethari had been born from, rising in great towers and sweeping arches that spoke of a civilization at the height of its power. It was the most heavily defended planet in the Dominion, ringed by orbital platforms and ground-based weapon systems and the constant patrol of warships. Or it had been. The warships were gone now, sent to die in human space. The orbital platforms were there, but they were designed to fight off pirate raids and minor incursions. Not a fleet of 5,000 warships armed with technology a century ahead of anything in the Dominion's arsenal. The human fleet arrived without warning. One moment the skies above Vether Prime were clear. The next moment, 5,000 ships filled the void above the planet like a dark cloud passing over the sun. The orbital platforms opened fire. The human fleet destroyed them in 11 minutes. Clean, precise, targeted strikes that disabled their weapons and power systems without destroying the stations themselves. The crews aboard the platforms were left alive, floating in disabled stations, watching through their viewports as the human fleet took up position in orbit around their world. Then the fleet went still. The weapons stopped firing. The ships hung in the sky like silent monuments, their dark hulls blocking out the stars. And they broadcast a message. It played on every frequency. Every communications system on Vether Prime picked it up. It played on military channels and civilian broadcasts, and emergency networks and personal devices. Every Vethari on the planet heard it, from the highest government officials in the capital to the children in the smallest rural settlement. People of Vether Prime, this is the United Earth Navy. Well, your fleet is gone. Your warriors are dead, captured, or in retreat. We are above your world. We have the ability to destroy your civilization in a matter of hours. We will not do this. We are not conquerors. We are not destroyers. We are not what you tried to make us. The message continued. We are offering you the following terms: immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities, withdrawal of all Vethari military forces from all contested territories, release of all 19 species currently held in vassalage by the Dominion, reparations to be paid to those vassal species, not to humanity, a formal public apology broadcast to the Galactic Concord. In return, your homeworld will not be touched. Your civilization will not be dismantled. Your people will not be harmed. Your culture will continue. You will remain a sovereign nation within the conquered. A pause. You have 1 solar cycle to accept these terms. We will wait. And they did wait. 5,000 warships hung above a world of billions, and they did nothing. They did not fire. They did not threaten. They did not even move. They simply sat there, a silent demonstration of absolute power, held in absolute restraint. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Concord erupted. The news of the 12 battles had spread within hours, carried by faster-than-light communication networks, and amplified by the sheer impossibility of what had happened. A minor species of 200 ships had revealed itself to be a military superpower of 18,000 warships and technology decades ahead of the galactic standard. The Vethari Dominion, when one of the 3 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, had been defeated in a single day. Human warships were now orbiting the Vethari homeworld. Every government, every military, every intelligence agency in the Concord was running the same calculations and arriving at the same conclusion. Humanity was not merely strong. Humanity might be the single most powerful military force in the galaxy. They had been for years, maybe decades, maybe longer. And they had said nothing, done nothing, taken nothing. The Concord Assembly convened an emergency session. The chamber, a vast circular hall that could seat representatives from 4,000 species, was full for the first time in years. Every seat was occupied. Every delegation was present. The noise was deafening, 1,000 alien voices shouting in 100 different languages, all of them asking the same questions. How did we not know? How did we miss this? What do we do now? Dr. Lissith Kyle was given the floor, not because anyone had invited her, but because the Morathani delegation, finally understanding the value of her 40 years of research, had demanded that she be heard. She walked to the speaker's platform on her old limping legs, and she looked out at 4,000 species worth of frightened faces, and she spoke. "I told you," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the chamber had gone silent to hear her, and the words carried. "I stood before your intelligence committee, and I told you that the absence of evidence was the evidence, that their silence was not weakness, that we did not know what was hiding behind their borders." She activated a display that showed the now confirmed human fleet strength to 18,000 warships, hundreds of thousands of defense platforms, technology that the Concorde's best scientists were still trying to understand. For 300 years, we had the most dangerous species in the galaxy as our neighbor, and we called them cowards. We laughed at them in our halls of power. We made jokes about their small fleet and their quiet diplomats. We patted them on the head and treated them like children. Her voice hardened. And when the Vethari came for them, not one of us helped. Not one. 4,000 species in this Concorde, and not a single one offered the humans so much as a sympathetic vote. We abandoned them because we thought they were weak, because helping the weak is inconvenient, because weak species do not matter. She looked around the chamber, and now we discover that they were not weak at all. They were the strongest of all of us. They had the power to dominate this galaxy, and they chose not to. They had the strength to take whatever they wanted, and they wanted nothing but to be left alone. Every peaceful day of the last 300 years was a choice. They chose gentleness when they could have chosen conquest. She paused. The silence in the chamber was absolute. "And you called them cowards." She left the platform without another word. The chamber remained silent for a long time after she was gone. On Vethar Prime, Warlord Corvette Tain received the surrender demand aboard his crippled flagship, which had limped home through hyperspace with its engines failing and its hull breached in 7 places. And he had survived the disaster in the Corvin system by retreating to the Talon of God when it became clear that the battle was lost. He had watched the destruction of his fleet from the bridge of his dying ship. He had seen the numbers. He had understood what they meant. Now he sat in his quarters aboard the Talon of God as it drifted in orbit above his homeworld, surrounded by 5,000 enemy ships, and he read the human terms of surrender. He read them once quickly, then he read them again slowly, then he read them a third time, because he could not believe what he was reading. The terms were lenient, not just lenient, they were generous. Humanity was demanding almost nothing for itself. No territory, no resources, no occupation, no regime change. They wanted the Vethari to stop fighting, to let their vassal species go, and to apologize. That was essentially it. Corveth had conquered 19 species. He knew what conquest terms looked like. He had written them himself. Territory seizures, resource extraction rights, military limitations, government restructuring, occupation forces, puppet rulers, humiliation rituals. These were the tools of the conqueror, and Corveth had used all of them. The humans were using none of them. It made no sense. They had won. They had won completely and utterly. Their fleet was above his world, and his fleet was debris. They could take anything they wanted, everything, and they were asking for almost nothing. Sirath entered his quarters. She had survived the battles too, though she looked like she had aged a decade in the past 12 days. Her silver blue scales were dull, and her eyes were heavy with exhaustion. The War Council has dissolved, she said. The civilian government is requesting your authorization to accept the human terms. Corveth sat in his chair and stared at the document on his screen. The terms that asked for almost nothing from a species that could take everything. "Why?" he said. The word came out as barely a whisper. "Supreme Warlord? Why these terms? Why not take our worlds? Why not break our fleet, scatter our people, and make us the 20th vassal species in their collection?" He looked at Sirath, and for the first time in her long service to him, she saw confusion in his golden eyes. Not anger, not pride, confusion. This is not how war works. This is not how victory works. You destroy your enemy or you make them serve you. Those are the options. Those have always been the options. "Perhaps not for them," Sirath said quietly. Corveth stared at her. Then he looked down at the ceremonial blade at his belt. It was ancient, made from the volcanic glass of Vethar Prime, sharper than metal and darker than night. It was the symbol of the Supreme Warlord's office, the symbol of Vethari defiance and strength. No Supreme Warlord in 6,000 years had ever surrendered it. He drew the blade from its sheath. He held it in his hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of it, the weight of 6,000 years of conquest and pride, and never ever yielding to an enemy. Then he set it down on the table. "I yield," he said. "Accept the terms." Word of the surrender spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. The Vethari Dominion, undefeated for 6 millennia, he had surrendered unconditionally to the humans. The war was over. It had lasted 11 days. And then Ambassador Ilara Voss appeared before the Galactic Concord. She had been given no advance notice. She had requested no special session. She simply arrived at the Concord Assembly Chamber, took her seat in the human delegation's modest section on the upper tier where minor species were placed, and asked to be recognized. She was recognized instantly. Every eye and sensor and appendage in the chamber turned toward her. She stood. She was still the same woman, still small, still gray-haired, still wearing simple clothing, still carrying that warm, sad smile that suddenly made so much more sense than it ever had before. "We never wanted you to see this," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the chamber was silent enough to hear a heartbeat. "Anna, we built our strength so that we would never have to use it. We stayed quiet so that we would never have to speak. We wanted nothing more than to live in our 12 systems, to trade with our neighbors, and to be left in peace." She looked around the chamber. 4,000 species, 4,000 civilizations, all of them watching her with new eyes. "Now you know what we are, and I understand that things can never go back to the way they were. You will look at us differently now. You will think of us differently. The quiet neighbors on the edge of the galaxy are gone, and in their place, you see something that frightens you." She paused. "We are sorry for that. We are truly sorry. Not for defending ourselves. We will never apologize for that, but for the fact that you had to see it. Honor for the fact that 3 centuries of peace and patience and carefully chosen silence have been undone in 11 days. We built a world where we could be gentle, and now that world is gone." She sat down. The silence in the chamber lasted a very long time, and it was a different kind of silence than anyone in the galaxy had ever heard before. It was the silence of 4,000 species realizing, all at once, that they had never understood the meaning of the word strength. 6 months passed. The galaxy did not stop spinning. Trade routes continued to flow. Diplomatic channels remained open. The Galactic Concord held its sessions, passed its resolutions, and managed its business. On the surface, the great machine of interstellar civilization ground on the same way it always had. But underneath the surface, everything had changed. Nothing was the same, and everyone knew it, even if most of them did not know how to talk about it. The Vethari-human war had lasted 11 days. 11 days from the first shot fired in the Corvin system to Corveth Tyne, setting down his blade aboard his broken flagship. In those 11 days, the Vethari Dominion lost over 34,000 warships. Millions of Vethari soldiers and crew were killed, captured or stranded in escape pods that humanity had carefully collected in return. The most powerful military machine in the galaxy, built and maintained over 6,000 years of continuous conquest, had been dismantled in less than 2 weeks. Humanity lost 214 ships and approximately 6,000 personnel. The numbers were published in the Concord's official record of the conflict, and every species that read them felt the same thing. Not surprise, not admiration, fear. A deep, primal fear that came from understanding, for the first time, just how wide the gap between human capability and everyone else's really was. But then the fear was joined by something else, something more confusing. Because of what humanity did next, the surrender terms were implemented exactly as written. The Vethari withdrew from 3 contested border systems, not even their own core territory, just disputed zones that had been argued over for decades. The 19 vassal species held under Vethari subjugation were released. All of them, every single one. Species that had been crushed under the Vethari boot for centuries were suddenly free. Their chains broken not by their own strength, but by a species most of them had never even met. Equal reparations were paid, not to humanity. Humanity asked for nothing. The reparations went to the freed vassal species, calculated based on the economic damage of their subjugation, and distributed through a neutral concord mechanism. Humanity did not even administer the distribution. They set up the framework, funded the initial costs out of their own treasury, and then stepped back. The Vathari apologized. It was a formal broadcast delivered by the civilian government that had taken power after Corvus Military Council dissolved. It was stiff and uncomfortable, and clearly painful for a species that had never apologized for anything in 6,000 years. But it was real, and it was public, and the galaxy heard it. And then the humans went home. That was the part that nobody could understand. The warships returned to their hidden berths in their 12 systems. The sensor curtain went back up, though now everyone knew it was there. The trade ships resumed their routes, carrying the same goods along the same paths as before. Ambassador Ilara Voss returned to her office on the Sarah Point and resumed her normal diplomatic schedule, attending Concord sessions and voting on minor resolutions, and smiling that warm, unsettling smile. It was as if the war had never happened, as if the most powerful military force in the galaxy had simply shrugged, folded itself back into its 12 quiet systems, and gone back to being the boring neighbors that nobody paid attention to. Except now everyone was paying attention. The first species to send a delegation to Earth were the Telluri, one of the 19 former Vathari vassal species. And they were a small, gentle people, soft-bodied and slow-moving, with large dark eyes and delicate hands that were made for art and craft rather than war. They had been conquered by the Vathari 400 years ago, and they had suffered greatly. Their culture had been suppressed. Their population had been forced into labor. Their homeworld had been stripped of resources. They had endured it all with quiet resignation, because they had no choice, and now they were free, and they did not know what to do with their freedom. The Telluri delegation arrived on Earth expecting to meet their new masters. This was the pattern they knew. One conqueror replaces another. The boot on their neck changes, but the neck remains bowed. They brought gifts, tribute, symbols of submission. They were prepared to pledge their loyalty, their labor, act their obedience to the species that had broken their chains. What they found confused them. The humans did not want their submission. They did not want their tribute. They did not even want their gratitude, though they received it graciously. What they wanted, the humans explained with the patient warmth of people who had expected this reaction and prepared for it, was to help. Within weeks, human engineers arrived on the Telluri homeworld. Not soldiers, not administrators, not governors, engineers. They came with construction equipment and medical supplies and agricultural technology, and they began to help the Telluri rebuild their world. They repaired infrastructure that the Vathari had damaged. They cleaned up pollution from Vathari mining operations. And they brought medical technology that could treat diseases that the Telluri had been dying from for centuries, because the Vathari did not consider vassal species worth healing. Teachers came too. Human educators who set up schools and training centers, not to teach the Telluri how to be human, but to help them recover the knowledge and culture that the Vathari had suppressed. Telluri art forms that had been banned were revived with human support. Telluri languages that had been fading were documented and preserved. Telluri history that had been erased was reconstructed from whatever fragments could be found. And the humans asked for nothing in return. Nothing. Not resources, not political alignment, not military basing rights, not trade concessions, not even public acknowledgement. They simply helped quietly and efficiently because it needed to be done and they had the ability to do it. The Telluri delegation leader, an elderly female named Sira Ven, stood in the middle of a newly rebuilt hospital in her planet's capital city and wept. She wept because the hospital was beautiful and because her people would no longer die of treatable diseases, and because the species that had made it possible was asking nothing from her. She wept because in 400 years of subjugation, no one had ever simply helped. And she wept because she was beginning to understand something about humanity that the rest of the galaxy was still struggling with. The same scene played out, with variations, across all 19 former vassal worlds. Human aid workers, engineers, doctors, And teachers fanned out across the galaxy in the largest humanitarian operation in recorded history. They worked alongside local populations, respecting local customs, learning local languages, adapting their help to local needs rather than imposing human solutions on alien problems. It was not perfect. There were misunderstandings, cultural frictions, and mistakes, but the intention was genuine, and the results were real. The galaxy watched, and the galaxy did not know what to make of it. This was not how power worked. This was not how history worked. When a species won a war, they took things. They expanded their territory, extracted resources, installed favorable governments, and built empires. That was the pattern. That had always been the pattern. Every great civilization in galactic history had followed it. The Vithari had followed it. The Kreth had followed it. The Selthari had followed it. It was, as far as most species were concerned, the natural order of things. Strength existed to serve itself. Power existed to be used. Victory existed to be exploited. Humanity was doing none of these things. And the absence of exploitation was, in its own way, more disturbing than exploitation would have been. Because if the humans were not motivated by the desire for power, territory, or resources, then what were they motivated by? What kind of species builds the most powerful military in the galaxy and then uses it to free other people's slaves? Dr. Lisseth Kale attempted to answer this question. She published a work that she had been writing for years, in a comprehensive analysis titled The Deathworld Doctrine, Understanding Humanity's Philosophy of Quiet Strength. It became the most widely read academic work in conquered history, downloaded billions of times across thousands of worlds. Her central argument was elegant and troubling. Humans, she wrote, were not peaceful despite being dangerous. They were peaceful because they were dangerous. Their relationship with violence was not one of ignorance or avoidance. It was one of deep, intimate, painful familiarity. Violence was woven into every level of their existence. Their bodies were built for it by evolution, strong and fast and resilient, with forward-facing predator eyes and hands that could make fists. Their history was saturated with it. Thousands of years of wars and conflicts and atrocities that they studied and remembered and taught to their children, not as glories, but as warnings. Their psychology was shaped by it, a constant tension between the capacity for violence and the desire to transcend it. They understood violence the way a recovering addict understands their drug. They knew what it could do. They knew how it felt. They knew how easy it would be to give in to it. And they had decided as a civilization, over centuries of blood and suffering and slow, painful learning, that they would not. Their silence, Lisseth argued, was not weakness. It was discipline. The hardest kind of discipline there was. The discipline of a species that could take everything but chose to take nothing. The discipline of a species that spent 300 years being laughed at. She mocked and dismissed and never once raised its hand in anger, because raising a hand in anger was the beginning of a path they had walked before and never wanted to walk again. They built their military not to use it, but to ensure they would never be forced to become something they did not want to be. It was a shield, not a sword, a guarantee of peace, maintained through the paradox of overwhelming strength. They were the quiet ones not because they had nothing to say, but because they had learned that the most powerful thing you could say was nothing at all. The work made Lisseth famous. She did not enjoy the fame. She had spent 40 years trying to warn people, and nobody had listened until it was too late. The fame felt less like recognition and more like an apology, and it came at the cost of thousands of lives that did not need to be lost. In the months after the war, the political landscape of the galaxy shifted in ways that no one had predicted. Species that had spent centuries in rivalry or hostility began to talk to each other differently. The simple fact that the most powerful civilization in the galaxy was also the most restrained forced everyone to reconsider their assumptions about what power meant and what it was for. The freed vassal species formed a loose coalition called the Liberated Worlds Compact. They did not pledge loyalty to humanity. Humanity did not ask them to. Instead, they pledged to each other a mutual defense and support agreement born from shared suffering and the shared experience of being freed by a species that wanted nothing in return. It was the first interstellar alliance in galactic history that was built not on strategic interest, but on gratitude and solidarity. Some species approach humanity with offers of alliance, military cooperation, and trade agreements far more generous than anything the humans had been offered before. Humanity accepted some trade proposals and politely declined the military alliances, just as they always had. But the tone of the refusal was different now. Before, everyone had assumed they declined because they had nothing to offer. Now everyone understood they declined because they did not need anything from anyone and did not want to entangle themselves in the obligations that came with military partnerships. Other species reacted with suspicion and fear. If humanity could hide 18,000 warships for 300 years, in what else were they hiding? If they had technology a century ahead of the galactic standard, how long before they used it for less noble purposes? The fact that they had shown restraint so far did not mean they would show restraint forever. Power corrupted. It always had. It always would. These fears were real, and they were reasonable, and the humans did not dismiss them. When species expressed concern, human diplomats acknowledged the concern directly and openly. "You are right to be cautious," Ilara Voss said at a Concord session when a Kreth representative raised the issue. "We would be cautious too in your position. We cannot prove our intentions with words, only with time. Watch us. Judge us by what we do, not what we say we will do. That is all we ask." It was an answer that satisfied no one completely, but it was honest. And honesty, the galaxy was beginning to learn, was the only currency humanity ever dealt in. There was one more meeting that mattered. It happened 3 months after the war, in a small room on a neutral station, far from the cameras in the Concord chambers and the grand stages of galactic diplomacy. Corveth Tyne, former supreme warlord of the Vathari Dominion, requested a private audience with Ambassador Ilara Voss. He had been stripped of his rank by the civilian government, though he had not been in prison. The humans, as part of the surrender terms, had not demanded his punishment. The Vathari public, humiliated by the defeat, had wanted blood. But the civilian government, in a rare act of courage, had chosen not to give it to them. Corveth was allowed to retire in disgrace, which for a Vathari was worse than death, but better than what most defeated warlords received. The meeting was granted. Corveth arrived alone without guards or aides. He was old and scarred and diminished, his bronze scales dulled, his movements slower than they had been before the war. His artificial eye flickered occasionally, damaged in the final battle and never properly repaired. Ilara was waiting for him in the room, just her, sitting in a plain chair at a plain table. 2 glasses of water. Nothing else. He sat across from her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They were, in a sense, the 2 people in the galaxy who understood each other best. He was the one who had started the war, and she was the one who had tried to prevent it. They had been on opposite sides of the greatest military conflict in a century, and they had both watched it happen with the particular anguish of people who had known, from the beginning, how it would end. "I have one question," Corveth said. His voice was rough, tired, the voice of a man who had been awake for a long time and could not find rest. Ilara nodded. "Ask. Why?" He leaned forward. "You could have destroyed us. You could have taken our worlds, scattered our people, erased our civilization from the galaxy. You had the power. You had the right by any law of war that has ever existed. We attacked you. We tried to conquer you. By every code I have ever lived by, the defeated submits to the will of the victor. You could have made an example of us that would have kept the galaxy terrified for 1,000 years. He looked at her with his one good eye and his one broken one. "Why didn't you?" Ilara was quiet for a moment. She looked at the old warrior across from her, and she saw something that most people would have missed. Not a monster, not a tyrant, a man. An old man who had lived his entire life by a set of rules that told him strength was everything, and who had just discovered that the strongest species in the galaxy played by completely different rules, and who could not understand why. "Because we have been you," she said. He frowned. "A long time ago on our homeworld, we were exactly like you. Conquerors, empire builders, destroyers. We fought each other constantly. We enslaved each other. We burned each other's cities and salted each other's fields and built monuments to our own glory on the bones of the defeated. We were so good at destruction that we almost destroyed ourselves. Several times. Was the last time we came very close. Close enough that we could see the end of everything, and it scared us badly enough to change. She paused. It took us centuries, centuries of learning, the hard way, through blood and suffering and failure after failure. That conquest does not bring peace. That domination does not bring security. That strength without restraint is just another word for self-destruction. She looked at Corveth steadily. We did not spare your people because we are better than you. We spared your people because we know what it feels like to be the conqueror who realizes too late that they have destroyed the very thing they were trying to protect. True strength is not about what you can destroy, Corveth. It is about what you choose to protect. But even when what you are protecting is the enemy who tried to destroy you. Corveth sat very still. The room was quiet. Outside the station, the stars turned their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of living things. I think, he said slowly, and his voice was different now, softer, uncertain, the voice of a very old student encountering a very new idea. I think I would like to understand your people better. Ilara smiled, that warm, unsettling smile that suddenly did not seem unsettling at all. Then you are already learning. They sat together for a while longer. They drank their water. They talked about small things, the kind of things that enemies who are trying to stop being enemies talk about. Corveth asked about Earth, and Ilara told him about the oceans and the mountains and the way the sky looked at sunset. Corveth told her about the volcanic glass caves of Vethar Prime, where crystals grew in colors that had no name in any language. They were two old people, tired of war, finding common ground in the simple fact that their worlds were beautiful. When Corveth left, he paused at the door. Your people's blade, he said, the one I surrendered, the ceremonial blade of the Supreme Warlord. Ilara reached into a case beside her chair and produced the blade. Volcanic glass, ancient and sharp, darker than the void between stars. She held it out to him. We never wanted it, she said. It belongs to your people. He stared at the blade. Then he took it carefully and held it the way one holds something precious and painful at the same time. Thank you, he said, and he meant it for more than just the blade. The galaxy settled into what historians would later call the New Quiet. It was not the same as the Old Quiet. The Old Quiet had been humanity's choice, a deliberate withdrawal from the galactic stage. The New Quiet was different. It was the quiet that comes after a storm, when the air is clean and the world is still, and everything looks the same, but feels different. Humanity returned to its 12 systems. The trade ships ran their routes. The diplomats attended their sessions. The censor curtain stayed up, though now it was more of a courtesy than a secret. Everyone knew it was there. Everyone knew what was behind it. And everyone knew that what was behind it was a species that could have ruled the galaxy and chose not to. When human diplomats spoke softly in the conquered halls, every species listened. Not because they were afraid, though some of them were. Because they had learned that when the quiet ones speak, it is worth hearing. When a human ship passed through foreign space, it was met not with condescension, but with a nod of respect. The captains of other vessels would signal a greeting, and the human ship would signal back, and both would continue on their way. And the interaction was small, but it meant something that it had not meant before. When conflicts arose between other species, as they always did and always would, there was a new factor in every calculation. Not what will the humans do, but what would the humans think? It was a subtle influence, the kind that could not be measured or quantified, but it was there. The knowledge that somewhere on the edge of the galaxy, a species was watching, quietly, patiently, and that species had the power to reshape everything and the wisdom not to. It was not a perfect galaxy. It never had been and never would be. Species still fought. Empires still rose and fell. Injustice still existed. Humanity did not fix everything, because fixing everything was not possible, and attempting it would have been the kind of arrogance they had learned to avoid. But things were a little better, a little kinder, a little more thoughtful, and that was enough. That was what 300 years of silence had been for. Not to hide, not to wait, But to prove that the loudest statement a species could make was the choice not to speak when they had every reason to shout. And somewhere beneath the surface of Earth, in a facility that did not appear on any registry, Prometheus dimmed its single red light back to dormant mode. After the crisis was over, the calculations were complete. The threat had been neutralized with the minimum necessary force, and the humans were safe, and the galaxy was still whole, and that was what mattered. The great intelligence settled into sleep, or something like sleep, and it waited, patient, silent, ready, as it had always been, as it always would be. A guardian built by a species that understood guardianship better than anyone, because they understood what happened when no one stood guard. The stars turned, the galaxy breathed, and the quiet ones went back to being quiet, because they had learned long ago, in the blood and fire of their terrible, beautiful, impossible world, the oldest and truest lesson that any species could learn. The loudest thing in the universe is silence, not only when it comes from something that could shake the stars,